Today we're taking a look at a new close-back headphone from FiiO's sub-brand, SnowSky the Nature. It doesn't seem to have gained much attention overseas, but in China it's actually quite popular. The reason is simple. This thing costs only around 199 RMB in China, which is roughly just 30 bucks. If you have watched my previous review of the FT13, you probably know I wasn't exactly impressed by it. So, when I saw the Nature, I was genuinely curious. What kind of sound can a close-back headphone this cheap actually achieve? And more importantly, did I learn a lesson from the FT13 and improve the sound on it? So, I bought one to find it out. The packaging and accessories are extremely simple. Also, when the package arrived, the box was already crushed. Not gonna lie, that was a pretty painful first impression. Inside, you get the headphone itself, a carrying pouch, a 3-pole 3.5 cable with an inline microphone, and the warranty documents. That's basically it. The headphone uses a wood-style finish on the housing. At first glance, it actually looks quite convincing, but in reality, it's a plastic shell with a wood coating. Considering the price, a real wooden construction would obviously be unrealistic. The inside of the headband has foam padding, and it's surprisingly soft. The air pad feeling is a little on the thinner side, but the overall feeling is still quite comfortable and soft. The air pad mounting mechanism is actually quite similar to a full step. Use a twist lock mounting system. You press the pad downwards, rotate it slightly, and it comes right off. The area around the driver that contacts your ear also has an additional layer of foam padding. This serves two purposes. First, it acts as acoustic damping, helping you reduce some high-frequency energy. Second, it also improves comfort. Once you put it on, the feeling is quite soft and cushioned, with a very strong sense of enclosure. Overall, the wearing experience is actually pretty good. However, there's one major issue. The Nature has no swivel mechanism. You can't adjust the angle. The only adjustment comes from the small amount of rotation available in the headband extension here. So, if you have a, say, big head, then the fit could be quite awkward. The sensitivity is rated at 101, with an impedance of 24 ohm. On paper, it's not a difficult headphone to drive. Looking at the impedance curve, the impedance at 1000 Hz is 23.5 ohm. The F0 is around 51 Hz, which is also where the impedance reaches its peak at around 30 ohm. The lowest impedance appears around 4.6 thousand Hz at 22.6 ohm. Overall, the impedance curve is very stable. That means whether you plug it into the laptop with rather high output impedance, a dongle deck, or a DAP, you should get a relatively consistent frequency response. You won't see certain frequency range suddenly jumping up just because your source has a high output impedance. Now let's take a look at the frequency response. FiiO described Nature as having a natural tuning. I'm not sure which parallel universe this natural tuning standard comes from. Maybe we're bits defeated synthesizer and established the definition of natural? Anyway, looking at the bass first, the overall response isn't particularly elevated. In fact, it sits very close to the lower boundary. In theory, that would suggest relatively weak bass, with reduced kick drum impacts, lower dynamic, and less fullness in the drum body. But obviously, that is almost the complete opposite of what I heard. The 150 to 400 Hz dip, however, does match the subjective impression much better. My guess is that this is caused by a lacking of internal damping material or the whole damping structure itself, thus creating a low frequency cancellation. This region mainly affects things like the fullness of bass instruments such as bass guitar, vocal chest resonance, and the body resonance of instruments like guitar and pianos. And this is exactly what I hear. Moving on to the mid-range, overall there isn't any wrong with it. However, because the lower mids are missing, the presentation becomes noticeably linear and cleaner. It is a style that prioritizes note definition and outline clarity over the body and fullness. Then we get to the 5 to 10,000 Hz region, which doesn't roll off at all. Instead, the energy continues to rise. This region mainly affects things like vocal sibilance, the edge definition of snare drum, and the brightness of cymbals and the metallic instruments. It also significantly increases the perceived sense of resolution. Combined with the recessed lower mids we talked about earlier, the treble becomes even more emphasized. Because there isn't enough low frequency body to provide the warmth and weight, the final result becomes a very typical thin and bright and harsh analytical sound. Cymbal becomes extremely prominent, snare drum sounds very crispy, and your first impression will probably be, wow, this thing is so detailed. But Over a long listening session, that sharpness can become quite fatiguing. Now, how does it actually sound? The overall presentation is quite V-shaped. You get a bass that's almost the same feeling of the Fostex TH900, combined with a treble region that carries a lot of energy. Starting with the bass, this is honestly where the nature impresses me the most. As a bass head, I can confidently say this might be one of the best bass performances you can get at $30. The impact is extremely strong, at the same time the extension is deep and the rebound is so good. It's a very complete bass presentation. It goes deep and it bounces back quickly and it hits hard with very impressive bass. The mid-range, however, is a bit more complicated. The amount of information and perceived clarity and detail are actually pretty good, but the sound lacks a certain foundation. It's like the detail are there, but the body supporting this detail is somehow missing. So if you look back at the frequency response, you'll notice that the entire 120 to 600 Hz region is recessed, and this affects quite a lot of instruments. For example, the lower range of the piano, roughly from A2 to C5, loses some of its weight and resonance. Another issue is male vocals. It feels almost like the lower half of the voice has been cut away, leaving only the upper portion floating in the ear. Deep male vocal can sound noticeably higher in pitch than they should. That's two of the problems I found with the mids. But I found a solution. I suspect the reason behind this is that the nature doesn't have enough damping inside the chamber, which causes the cancellation in lower mids. Considering my review process is basically buy a product, review it, sell it, and then raise the funds for the next review, I did not open the headphone up to verify the internal structure. But if the theory is correct, adding damping material inside the rear chamber should help reduce the cancellation. The simplest way I found was adding a 200 mesh damping material over the top vent. This is basically the same thing you can find in FiiO Make series accessories. You can simply stick it over the vent at the top. After adding the damping material, the measure frequency response looks like this, much better. Treble is very bright, and the extension is actually very impressive. It extends very high. However, the overall presentation is a bit aggressive. The higher it goes and the more energy it seems to concentrate into a narrower area. Eventually, the trebles start to feel almost like a knife edge, very sharp and extremely defined. As a result, things like vocals and sound, as well as metallic percussions such as triangles and tambourines, can become quite intense. The details are definitely there, but the presentation can sometimes feel a little too sharp. Finally, let's talk about the soundstage. Just like the bass, this is another area where the nature performs surprisingly well. The soundstage and sense of space are genuinely impressive. It's absolutely above what I would normally expect at this price. One thing you will immediately notice is the separation, or to say distance, between the vocal and instrument. There's a very obvious separation, almost like a moat between them. Vocals are placed right in front of your face, while the instruments are pushed behind you, appearing around the back of your head or slightly lower behind. That large gap between the vocal image and the instrument layer creates a surprisingly spacious presentation. It gives the impression that the sound isn't trapped inside the headphone, but instead expands into a much larger space around you. So, overall, I would say the two strongest aspects of the nature are definitely the bass and the soundstage. For the headphone at this price point, these two areas are genuinely impressive.